At sunrise, the Colosseum was already alive. Its massive arches caught the first pale streaks of light, while yesterday's blood still clung to the stone like a shadow. Beneath the stands, vendors barked for attention, baskets brimming with olives and watered wine, ready for a crowd that hadn't even taken their seats. Beyond the iron gates, handlers shoved half-starved predators into place. Lions with ribs jutting through their fur, elephants stamping in rage, panthers raking their claws against the bars. From the tunnels came the sharp clang of swords, not practice swings, but tests for the day's killing steel. And over it all, a low hum swelled into a roar, tens of thousands of Romans pouring in, hungry for the thing their empire perfected better than anyone: death, dressed up as entertainment. The Roman arena wasn't just sport. It was a laboratory for cruelty. Emperors flooded the sand to stage naval battles, starved wild animals to heighten suspense, and forced prisoners to act out myths that ended with very real corpses. None of this was accidental. It was policy woven deep into Rome's machinery of control. Cheering from the stands wasn't harmless. It was loyalty, shouted loud enough to echo through history. And today, we're stepping straight into that shadow. These are the most brutal, most inhumane arena acts that went too far, even for Rome. From blood-soaked funeral rites to executions dressed as theatre, we'll uncover how an empire built its glory on turning suffering into applause. Before we dive in, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next descent into history's darkest corners. Now, take your seat. The gates are creaking open. The first gladiatorial combat in Rome didn't begin with golden fanfare or emperors in royal purple. It began at a funeral. In 264 BC, the sons of Decimus, Junius, Brutus, Scaeva chose not to honour their father with statues or prayers, but with blood. They armed 3 pairs of slaves and sent them to fight to the death in the Forum Boarium, a cattle market thick with the stench of dung and smoke. This wasn't entertainment. It was duty, munus, an obligation owed to the dead. Its roots stretched far beyond Rome. In Campania, warriors were slain at graves to appease restless spirits. Over time, killing shifted to combat. The dead no longer demanded random victims, but duels between chosen men. The Samnites, once Rome's bitter enemies, held such contests often, and Roman elites embraced the custom eagerly. Burying a man with treasures showed wealth. Burying him with a blood-drenched spectacle proved power. But funerals were only the beginning. By the 3rd century BC, Rome's leaders saw how these fights could do more than honour ancestors. They could steady politics. Religious festivals, once solemn offerings to Jupiter, began featuring gladiators. The Senate framed it as piety, but the crowd knew the truth: state-sponsored violence designed to keep the people loyal. Even the armour told stories. Early fighters wore the shapes of conquered foes: the Samnite with his heavy shield, the Thracian with a curved blade, the Gaul with a broadsword. Watching them bleed was watching Rome's victories replayed, slash after slash. Death became propaganda, and as blood spilled, the venues grew. Temporary wooden stands gave way to permanent amphitheatres, temples to violence where thousands gathered. The games no longer belonged to grieving families, they belonged to the state. Each drop of blood whispered the same message. Rome commanded men, armies, even death itself. No one then could have guessed how far it would go. What started as ritual sacrifice morphed into theatre, and duty became obsession. Rome had discovered a new weapon power over not just the living, but the meaning of dying. And once unleashed, it never closed that door. The crowd's roar wasn't reserved for men. Sometimes it thundered for beasts hauled from the farthest edges of the known world. Lions from North Africa, leopards from the Caucasus, crocodiles from the Nile, even giraffes dragged across deserts. They weren't displayed as wonders of nature, but condemned as prey in a carnival of slaughter. Romans called these shows venations, hunts. They weren't about survival, but about domination, proof the empire could trap the wild and destroy it for pleasure. Julius Caesar set the tone in 46 BC, parading a giraffe, the first ever seen in Europe. They called it a camelopard, half camel, half leopard, because Rome had no name for such a creature. It didn't matter. The animal wasn't admired. It was thrown into the sand to be torn apart. The message was unmistakable. If Rome could seize the strangest beasts alive, it could conquer anything. The slaughter only grew. When the Colosseum opened in AD 80, Emperor Titus reportedly oversaw the deaths of more than 9,000 animals in one festival. Archaeologists have found bones etched with marks of deliberate starvation, evidence that lions and bears were weakened beforehand to ensure a quick, bloody kill. Even elephants, once the terror of Roman legions under Hannibal, were herded into the arena and butchered for cheers. Behind the scenes, logistics were part of the theatre. Exotic creatures had to be trapped, hauled across deserts, kept alive just long enough to meet their doom. Caravans dragged chains through scorching sands, delivering victims to a city that demanded fresh blood with every sunrise. Caravans dragged cages across deserts, fleets floated them down the Nile, and handlers risked their lives just to deliver living trophies to Rome. Seeing a panther in the wild was dangerous enough. Watching one explode from a cage in front of 50,000 screaming spectators, that was power made visible. Every creature was a living souvenir of conquest, proof that the empire's reach knew no limits. Some emperors made these hunts their own private stages. Commodus, Rome's most flamboyant showman, strode into the arena dressed as Hercules, slaughtering hundreds of animals himself. He wanted to look like a god among beasts, but everyone could see the truth, a fragile ego with a bow. The hunts were often rigged, animals were chained, maimed, or half-starved so the emperor could bask in a guaranteed victory. And the people, they cheered, not because they admired him, but because when the emperor hunts, silence could be fatal. Behind the cheers, a quieter tragedy unfolded. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder warned how rare species vanished from their homelands after decades of Roman slaughter. Lions, leopards, and even elephants were pushed toward extinction to feed the empire's appetite for spectacle. The Colosseum wasn't just a theatre of death, it was an ecological wrecking ball. But for Rome, extinction didn't matter. What mattered was the illusion that nature itself could be captured, starved, and destroyed for fun. Every carcass on the sand was another brick in the wall of imperial control. When you picture a gladiator, you might imagine two evenly matched warriors locked in noble combat. The reality was far more twisted. Rome thrived on imbalance, on contests engineered for cruelty. They built bizarre weapons, imposed absurd rules, and staged fights no one could truly win. Some victims weren't fighters at all. Prisoners and condemned criminals were shoved into the arena dressed as clowns, handed wooden swords, and sent to die against seasoned killers. The crowd jeered as the doomed flailed and fell. Public execution, neatly disguised as sport. Even the weapons became characters. The retiaires fought with a fisherman's net and trident, squaring off against the circuiter, whose smooth, rounded helmet was designed to deflect the net. It wasn't pure skill, it was suspense, a living riddle of whether the net would ensnare or the sword would break through. Romans devoured that tension, even when the match was as scripted as a stage play. The numbers grew more obscene. Sometimes one gladiator was thrown against several foes. Other days, entire units clashed like miniature armies, turning the arena floor into a swamp of blood, splintered shields, and mangled corpses. And when novelty wore thin, they reached further. Female gladiators, gladiatresses, stepped onto the sand in the 1st century AD. Writers like Juvenal mocked them, yet records prove they fought for real, against dwarfs, against beasts, even against each other. Their presence blurred gender lines, but reinforced a darker truth. No one, man or woman, was beyond Rome's hunger for spectacle. Even the helmets were weapons of torment. Some narrowed vision or muffled sound, forcing fighters to stumble half-blind while the audience roared with laughter. Others were so heavy that raising one's head became a contest all its own. Armor wasn't always protection, sometimes it was punishment. And then came the propaganda plays. Gladiators dressed as barbarians, forced to mimic Rome's defeated enemies. Their inevitable loss reminded everyone that the empire always prevailed. Every mismatch, every exotic twist, every gender-bending stunt was carefully designed to keep crowds shocked, obedient, and begging for more. The Colosseum never settled for repetition. it invented new cruelties, always hunting for the next thrill. By midday, once the morning duels had soaked the sand and the crowd started to fidget, the arena shifted gears. Combat gave way to theatre, with death at centre stage. Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. For the condemned, it wasn't a trial, it was a script they had no power to refuse. Criminals, deserters, rebellious slaves, prisoners of war, they all became unwilling actors in an execution disguised as myth. Each victim's punishment matched their crime. Thieves torn apart by wolves, arsonists burned alive, traitors thrown to lions. Every scene was a morality play written in real blood. And the scale could stagger belief. During Emperor Trajan's celebrations after his Dacian victory, thousands of captives were slaughtered over 103 relentless days. It wasn't random carnage. It was organized, paced like acts in a grim drama, every death crafted to keep the audience on edge until the next horror arrived. Animals were the stars of this nightmare. Lions were starved to a frenzy before release. Bears, chained in pits, were goaded into sudden fury. Even prized leopards were unleashed on trembling victims. The uncertainty, would the beast strike fast or toy with its prey, kept the stands howling for more. Sometimes, the cruelty came dressed as legend. Prisoners were forced to play doomed heroes. Orpheus torn apart by wild beasts, Prometheus chained as vultures circled overhead. These weren't stories anymore. They were blood-soaked performances, and the sand was their stage. Death in Rome wasn't always just death. Sometimes it was theatre, bloody, mocking theatre. For the condemned, it wasn't enough to perish. They had to perform their demise, acting out Rome's myths with their own bodies. Executions became grotesque plays where flesh replaced masks, and the script always ended in agony. The cruelty stretched far beyond wild beasts. Crucifixion, borrowed from the East, was staged right inside the arena. Men and women were nailed to timber while vendors hawked wine and children played nearby. Fire joined the spectacle too. Prisoners were forced into the tunica molesta, a shirt soaked in pitch, then set ablaze, human torches writhing as smoke curled into the sky. As Tertullian bitterly wrote, they were living torches. These killings weren't just morbid entertainment, they were propaganda, warnings carved into living flesh. Defy Rome, and you would die slowly, with tens of thousands watching. Not everyone could stomach it. Seneca complained that midday executions hardened the soul, making men crueler as they watched. But his protest drowned in the thunder of a crowd that came not for justice, but for the thrill of punishment. Rome's imagination didn't stop with sand and swords. Sometimes, emperors demanded oceans inside the city. Mock naval battles, naumachii, were spectacles on an insane scale where water itself became a weapon. Julius Caesar set the precedent in 46 BC, digging an enormous basin near the Tiber, filling it with water and real ships. Thousands of doomed captives were shoved aboard and told to fight as rival fleets. They weren't actors, they were men condemned to die for applause. Arrows, catapults, and steel turned the basin into a slaughterhouse afloat. Augustus expanded the madness. In 2 BC, he created a basin almost 2,000 by 1,200 Roman feet, fed by a custom aqueduct, the Aqua Alsiatina, just to keep it full. 30 warships clashed there, each crammed with prisoners fated never to leave alive. The message: Rome could command seas where none existed, even nature bent to imperial whim. By 52 AD, Claudius went further, draining Lake Fucine to stage another Naumachia. When the captives greeted him with the chilling salute, "Morituri te salutant," those who are about to die salute you, history gained one of its most haunting lines. Whether rehearsed or desperate, it summed up the hopelessness of men made into props.